Well, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I enjoy realtors. My father was a realtor for Century 21, and I have many realtor friends in the San Gabriel Valley. And so when I was asked to speak about housing, I tried to come up with a catchy title, and I think I found it. It's an extraordinarily interesting time in California in regards to housing, the type of decisions that are going to shape the state and our communities moving forward over the next century. It's pretty remarkable. Let me just, before I dive in, let me just kind of give just a little bit of background. I come from the San Gabriel Valley Economic Partnership. We were founded in 1991. We are a regional economic development corporation. Essentially, we're a very large business organization that covers eastern LA County. So that goes basically La Cañada, Pasadena, down to Monterey Park and Montebello, and all the way out to Pomona and Claremont. We have an old joke in the San Gabriel Valley: we are far from God and too close to LA. And this is one of our challenges. We are next to this huge city of Los Angeles, and it really overshadows the rest of the county. While we have extraordinary culture, extraordinary communities here in the San Gabriel Valley, and we have some unique features and benefits. We're much more affordable to live in generally than LA for the most part. We have great schools, great institutions of higher education. It's an extraordinary region, and we try to promote it, and I do all the politics for the partnership. I've known Lee Lieberg for years. Lee Lieberg I consider is kind of like the George Clooney of the San Gabriel Valley. He's just this incredible presence that, just Mr. Charisma, and so I'm very glad to be with you here today. Now, let me talk about, I'm going to cover a whole lot of subjects, but I will hit the brakes, and then we will have some questions here at the end, because there's a lot of interesting things going on, a lot of changes contemplated in regards to housing and in regards to many other policies at the state level. Now, I've called it, it's the end of the world as we know it, and that's because these changes are going to take place. And I've used here, this is a photo from Leilani Estates on the Big Island of Hawaii. This is just south of Hilo. As you know, last year there was a 7th-month eruption of the volcano Kilauea, and it's extraordinary. Imagine just being in a suburban community and the earth opens and outpours lava. Well, that's a lot of what's going to happen here in California. So, with that preview, let me just dive in. So, there's some extraordinary things going on at the state level, and this goes back several years. As you know, people describe housing in California as a crisis, and it absolutely is. The cost of housing, especially all around the state, is rising and rising. If you're in the Bay Area, good luck trying to find a home that's affordable on a middle-class salary, right? Down here in LA, in San Diego, Orange County, it's also very challenging. I have a brother who he was living in Riverside County, Murrieta, and he lost his job during the Great Recession. And so he moved to the state of Utah in 2010, found a new job up there. Bought a 5-bedroom house, I don't know how many square feet, brand new, on a half-acre of land, $125,000. So he has snow, but he's got a big house. So it's one of those extraordinary things, and in other parts of the country, it's just kind of amazing the different types of prices and homes that are available. In California, the state government, the crisis is so bad is that the state government is really, that this has to be a top priority. Housing was not really the #1 issue for Governor Jerry Brown. Governor Newsom, who has just started this year as governor, has said it is a top priority for him. So about 2 years ago, there was a major package of bills passed in the legislature in 2017. Now, some of them you're probably familiar with. There was a major fee on real estate transaction documents, $75, and that was designed to basically generate $300 to $400 million every year that would go into affordable housing. As you know, trying to find below market rate housing to build those units and sustain those units, because they have to be heavily subsidized, is very challenging for the state government. But that amount of money, even though it's very significant for the real estate community, is not very significant on a state level. There was also a bond act that was passed, also again, probably for about $4 billion, and that money was approved by the voters in 2018. That money is going to go to the state, and what they'll be able to do is leverage additional dollars from the federal government to build more housing. But again, I don't think it'll have much of a significant dent really on our housing crisis. There was a very controversial bill, SB 35, and this is on streamlining the housing approval process. This is mostly for local governments, and what they can do is what they call BiRite Housing. I'm not exactly I'm sort of a generalist. I kind of know what's going on, but I don't know all the details about everything. SB 35 is BiRite Housing approval, and so essentially areas that are already zoned for housing and have the projects already ready to go, it helps to expedite that process. It was a complicated, controversial bill, and there's kind of a follow-up bill this year that we'll talk about in a moment. So the state is starting to do these things. It's starting to move, it's starting to change the laws, it's trying to expedite the construction and building of housing. Now, you're also probably familiar with Prop 10. This was the statewide rent control ballot measure, which failed last year. Very much soundly defeated across the state, so about 60% said no, and only 40% said yes. However, in LA County, much closer results. And essentially what Prop 10 wanted to do was to open up the state law on rent control, and to basically open that up and allow each community, every city by city to decide how they want to do rent control, if they want to do it. There are about 15 cities in the state that have rent control, Santa Monica, Los Angeles, San Francisco, San Jose, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think that those communities are exactly affordable, right? And they've had rent control since the 70s. And so I think rent control is a very, very bad idea, but it's not going away. You can say amen, that's cool, man. So, we're actually in a really interesting time now with Governor Newsom. He has basically, the way I describe it is, it's a real end of the world, because Governor Newsom is very much determined we're going to change how we do housing in the state of California. Part of that is to incentivize the construction of new housing, new homes, but also to basically change the way that the local governments look at housing themselves. So in his 2019 budget, as you know, the state of California is in really good financial shape right now. It has probably a budget surplus of around $20 billion. We'll have to see how those numbers actually come out at the end of the month, because you probably all just paid your taxes. We'll have to see what the final numbers look like, but you know, they have $20 billion to kind of play with of spare cash. Now, they could obviously give that back to the taxpayers, but they're not going to do that. So what Governor Newsom has done is he's going to put aside about $1.75 billion for housing. $750 million of that goes to local government grants. A lot of that to help local governments change their zoning, their planning. $500 million goes to general purposes for state housing statewide. There's a mixed income loan program, and they also want to expand the housing tax credit by $500 million, very significant. So $300 million for low income housing tax credits, $200 million to new high income housing, with an additional $600 million for homelessness programs. Now, those were carrots, these are sticks. He also wants to reform what they call the Regional Housing Needs Assessment. It's better known by the acronym RHNA. RHNA sounds like a venereal disease, but it's not. It's Regional Housing Needs Assessment. And so if you know any of your local government people, essentially the state of California, through a complicated process, develops a number of housing goals that each city has to achieve over a period of several years. So let's say the city of Alhambra, over an 8-year period, has to build 400 units of above market rate homes. They have to build, say, 200 at moderate income, below moderate income, so many. So they have certain established goals. One of the stories that's been circulating around the state is actually the great city of Beverly Hills. They were assigned by the state to build 3 affordable housing units over 10 years. They achieved that, they built 9. So they're at 300%. So over 10 years, the city of Beverly Hills built 9 affordable housing units. And actually, that's not bad, considering where most of the other state is. Now, one of the things the governor's talked about says, like, if your city doesn't meet the housing goals that the state has set for you, what they're going to do is they're going to take away a certain amount of money that cities are receiving from the new gas tax. So they passed a gas tax a couple of years ago. You're paying a little bit more at the pump, and that money actually goes to a number of different transportation projects all around the state. But part of that money goes back to your local city governments in Monterey Park and San Gabriel and Rosemead and so on. And what they do is they're out fixing your streets, changing the sidewalks, doing improvements and so on. Very important money for your local cities. Governor Newsom says, if you don't build housing, I'm going to take that money away. So essentially that's a big finger in the eye of your local cities. Cities don't like that. He's also decided to sue cities that do not meet their housing goals. He recently decided to sue the great city of Huntington Beach. And it's also very interesting because there are some cities that basically just don't build housing whatsoever. They don't even bother to fill out the report that they're supposed to and send it to the state. So the city of Montebello did that. The state looked at their records and are like, Montebello has not filed a report with us in 7 years. Actually, it turns out that we talked to their city manager and they just forgot to do it. So anyway, it's a very interesting time that the governor basically says, you need to build. And cities, you need to wrap your heads around it, build more houses of all kinds. I won't go through this whole thing, but essentially the governor's staff is saying he's going to use sticks here. Now, here in the San Gabriel Valley, this is the city of Pasadena, just for an example. Let me just show this real quick here. So you can see here in the red, these are the goals that they're supposed to meet, right? So for very low income, this is over basically a 5-year period, 2013 through 17. You have 340 units of low income, they've built 144. Low income, they're supposed to build 207, moderate 45, you see how far away. Above moderate, 1,500 units in Pasadena. And then for their total, they actually have added a number of great housing units, but how many of them have actually within the state goals? Very few. For the entire region as a whole, these are the 31 cities in the region. You see they're supposed to add about 22,000 units. They've actually built only 6,286. Now, some of these numbers are skewed because we don't have reports from very large cities. So, for instance, the city of Pomona has not filed a report on housing with the state in 10 years. So, some cities are doing a good job, some cities are not. But it's one of these interesting issues where you have to look at your own city and how pro-growth, how much pro-development are they. And housing is very controversial, as you well know. People will say, look, I don't want another apartment building. I don't want people of low incomes living in my town. You can also just say, like, look, I don't want an apartment building down the road. I mean, that's more traffic, more cars. Traffic's bad enough as it is. Why do I need these people living around me and so on? So it's a very controversial thing, but it's about kind of, I think, looking and changing our own attitudes about housing and having influence on our communities about how important it is. All right, the Bay Area CASA compact policies. You guys are getting the good stuff today. So there's a great, well, I don't know how you feel about the Bay Area. I have conflicted feelings, but this is not group therapy. So the Bay Area actually had a very interesting meeting a few years ago, and essentially they call themselves the CASA Compact. And they're convened in 2017. It's a lot of smart people they got in a room, and what they developed was a package of different things that they want to try. So there are 10 recommendations and 5 calls to action, which has resulted in 20 different bills being introduced in the legislature. Now, some of these bills have some good ideas, some of these bills have very bad ideas. I'm of the opinion that California is a massive state. The Bay Area is a small part of it, a significant part of it to be sure, but not everything that works in San Francisco can work here in Los Angeles or in San Diego and so on. So some of these bills, let me run through, I won't go through all of them, but I'll talk about a few at length. You can see here, these are the list of the bills. They're basically, AB 36 is a bill I'll bring to your attention. This is by Richard Bloom from Santa Monica. Essentially, we just have defeated Prop 10. AB 36 brings Prop 10 back and says we can do rent control in units built after 1994. So it reintroduces statewide, top-down rent control across the state. And it's a very bad bill, but it's back, it's not going away. There's a lot of other things about minimum zoning. SB 50, very important bill. Essentially, that calls for greater density around transit stops, especially around, like, let's say, light rail transit, rail transit. It's unclear whether that would apply to bus stops, but that bill just passed through its first committee hearing in Senate Housing. It will be heard in the Governance and Finance Committee in the Senate at the end of the month. That thing is still going to be working out, but it's controversial from local governance, from a local government perspective, because it overrides the zoning that already exists around those transit areas. It basically says, look, if you're in a half mile of a Gold Line station, you get to build as dense as you want, as high as you want. And so it's a very aggressive kind of bill. But these are the types of things that are coming out of Sacramento. They essentially say, look, local governments, you got to build. And if you're not going to build, we're going to make you build, right? So it's a very interesting, controversial thing. Now, I'd like to talk about accessory dwelling units here for a little bit. Are most of you familiar with accessory dwelling units? These are usually called granny flats or casitas. They're a very interesting idea, and there's actually some numbers that are coming out that I think is very interesting for the real estate community. So, in 2017, they passed a whole bunch of housing bills. One of the bills that kind of went along under the radar was a bill by Senator Wiatkowski from Fremont. And what it did was, it says, like, look, if you're a homeowner, you want to build a granny flat in your backyard, you want to remodel your garage, typically what you have to do is you have to pay development impact fees. Right, so local governments charge a certain amount of fee. If you're doing a massive sprawling housing project, well, you know, you're going to have impacts on the number of kind of like, you know, how many people are going to be using our parks, our fire department, our police department. So you have to pay a certain fee right off the top that goes to local governments. Now, if you're a homeowner and you're going to build a granny flat in your backyard, you still typically have to pay some kind of development fees. There was a bill that was passed in 2017 that said, no. City governments should not have to, if you're a homeowner, you shouldn't have to pay these type of fees because you're not going to have the same impact on city services as a housing project would, right? And so what the state is trying to do is they're trying to incentivize homeowners to build more of these units. Now, there are a lot of very interesting things about accessory dwelling units that have natural advantages over others. Number one is, if you're, let's say, a developer, and you only build accessory dwelling units, you don't have to buy land. That's a huge deal because the cost of land is so very high. So you don't have to buy land. And also you can build these units relatively affordably, right? How much does it cost to remodel your garage and turn it into an apartment? Not that much, comparatively. City of Los Angeles in 2016 passed a ballot measure called Measure HHH. And what it is it goes towards it goes towards generally low income and homeless housing. But they're having a great deal of struggle trying to get that money, it's a sales tax, they're trying to use the money that they've raised to build more units. Well, they wanted to build 10,000 units in 10 years. Right now it looks like they'd be lucky to build maybe 5,000. And part of that is that the bureaucratic mess is just chewing through their money. And the cost per unit of housing is something where $500,000 or $80,000 per unit. To build an accessory dwelling unit, let's say in your backyard in Monterey Park or in Alhambra, San Gabriel, maybe $150,000, maybe, right? So it gives homeowners a huge incentive to say, I can improve my property, I can get a small loan, we can do this very quickly, and then it gives great flexibility to the property because you can have your in-laws, an elderly grandmother, an elderly grandfather live there with your family. You have a kid coming home from college. They can be in the casita or in the backyard and so on. And also it could be a rental property. And so it gives a great deal of flexibility to homeowners and also raises the value of their homes. So it's a really interesting idea. Now, let me give you some numbers, and I want this to kind of resonate. In 2015 and in 2016, on average, the city of Los Angeles built 85 accessory dwelling units per year. Okay, 85 in 2015, 85 on average in 2016. After this law was passed in 2017, the city of Los Angeles built 1,980 ADUs, right? That's a lot of housing very quickly without having to purchase any land, right? And so that's an extraordinary thing. That's an interesting concept, I think, for real estate and real estate properties, if people who are looking to invest and increase the value of their homes, and also for cities that are looking to add more housing units. ADUs is looking like a very promising way to go. Now, let me keep going. I won't go through all of these because these are pretty interesting here. There is talk about building sort of a large housing authority in the Bay Area. And this is a new agency that would focus on housing, that would cover 9 counties in the Bay Area and would have the authority to tax and have the authority to bond. So essentially, there'd be a new government agency in the Bay Area, covers the whole region, and they could say, look, we got to build more affordable housing. We're going to put on a sales tax measure of 0.25%, right? Now, I don't know if that would fly here in Southern California because our counties are much, much larger. Now, there is a bill to cover the San Gabriel Valley that would create a housing trust fund. Essentially, this is sort of an entity that would be able to develop and have more funding for additional housing construction here in the region. All right. I'm going to conclude right there because I think that's a good place to stop, and I will take your questions. I can talk in greater detail, but if anybody would like questions, I'm happy to take them right now. Yes, sir.
Yeah, why did our governor go down to El Salvador to discuss their housing crisis?
You'll have to talk to Gavin about that. I can't say it for him. Yes, sir.
With regards to density, say in the city of Pasadena, some of these goals are challenging, if not impossible. So how do you address that yin yang concept of where we're going to go with this in reality?
It's very challenging. It's very challenging because part of it too is just the changing nature of these communities, and we know that better than anybody in the San Gabriel Valley. You know, Pasadena used to be kind of a sleepy suburb, and now it's hipsterville, right? And a lot of people who are from Pasadena are like, look, I can't even afford to live in my hometown. And I don't know if that's a trend that can be reversed. If you go to Glendale, if you go to Burbank, that's happening there as well. People who are making more money, who are living in different types of homes, you know, in apartment buildings and condominiums and so on. Those are the people who are moving in. Those are the type of units that they're building. And a lot of people basically say the future of Southern California is high-rise apartment buildings. Maybe that's true. I'm not entirely certain. But I think that there should be more flexibility in the type of housing. There are a lot of different types of housing projects that can be built. There are a lot of townhomes, smaller type of 2 or 3 units. Like, you don't really need, in order to get our housing needs, you probably don't need to go above 2 or 3 stories, right? And you can have a lot of kind of a different range and types of building to really meet the number of housing units that we could have. So I'm not entirely certain about Pasadena. I think there are larger forces at work in our economy which are driving people to be in that kind of heavily gentrified area. I don't think that'll happen all across the San Gabriel Valley, but it will happen for a significant portion of it. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
I'm curious, does the demand from Sacramento recognize a demand for housing for people that make like an average median income or lower than that even? Does it ask the cities to build those kind of houses or rental properties?
That's a really interesting question, and one of the things that the way we talk about housing, you need to, I think because there's a communication barrier. When I talk about housing, I talk about it mostly from an economic development standpoint. But it goes down to a much more personal and more interesting standpoint, which is to say, if you're a middle-class person and you're making $60,000 a year in California, can you ever buy a home?
No.
Right? And that's something that's really, I'm a Beach Boys fan. I listen to the Beach Boys all the time. And it's like, boy, you know, if you're living in California in 1960, it's a pretty awesome state. There's only 10 million people here. And, you know, you could buy a house in Long Beach for who knows how much, right? But that state's long gone, right? So it's about economic opportunity. It's about the quality of life that you and your children are going to have and your grandchildren in this place. I mean, a lot of people think that California is just turning into Hawaii. And what they mean by that is that Hawaii essentially is a very bifurcated state. There's a lot of wealthy people who fly in, come and have vacations there. And then there's a lot of local people who don't make a lot of money and work for the wealthy people at the resorts, right? Some people think California is turning into that way, that there are wealthy people who live along the coasts, and then there's the people who work for them who live in Inland Empire and Central Valley and commute into work and spend 3 or 4 hours in the car or on the train trying to get to their job and can never really, you know, build a home, having a home traditionally in the United States of America is the way that you rise up out of the middle class, right? It's the way that you develop wealth. And that is basically forbidden to most Californians right now because they don't have an opportunity to purchase a property that will increase in value and ensure their financial stability for the future. There are other states in this great country, North Carolina, Tennessee, Arizona, Texas, I can go on, where that's still very much a possibility. So the larger question is, what is the character of the state of California moving forward? Do we even care about the middle class, and are the choices we're making in Sacramento leading to greater gentrification, leading to greater exodus of a middle class? You basically are going to have some wealthy at the top, a lot of professionals, doctors, lawyers, attorneys who make pretty good money, and a lot of people at the bottom. And that's a real problem, especially because we will soon be a majority renter state. So this is the type of issues and questions that they're deciding right now in Sacramento. And unfortunately, I think, from what I understand with the governor, he's talking a lot about economic equality, about saying, well, you know, Silicon Valley's doing great stuff, but Silicon Valley should help us in Central Valley, in Fresno, Modesto, Vallejo, and so on. Is Vallejo in Central Valley? Bakersfield. But I don't know if it's really resonating, because in order to have a middle class, you need to have middle class jobs. You need to have jobs that pay, you know, 75 to 100, maybe 60 to 100. But even on that salary, it's hard to make it in LA County. And so it goes to a much deeper issue. Yes, Lee?
You hit on a lot of good topics today. I appreciate it.
I did, didn't I?
What do you think about the chances of split roll coming our way? And what, you know, we know what it'll do. Well, hopefully it'll protect the residential market, but you are more familiar with the commercial market.
This is a devastating issue, and there aren't many issues that really unite the business community in California like split roll. Split roll will be on the ballot in 2020. Everyone's familiar with split roll, yes? Yes? Split roll, essentially, in 1978, in the great state of California, the voters passed Prop 13. And what Prop 13 did is locked in property tax values. And so essentially it limited the growth over a period of time. So our property taxes increased at a very stable rate. But many people in the state say, like, look, Prop 13 was a disaster, because what it did is it limited the growth in property taxes. So therefore the schools especially did not get the amount of money that they should receive. Some people in the state, and I've talked to them in Sacramento and here, basically think that the voters of California have cheated their children out of their education for the tune of over $1 trillion, right? So what split roll does is it says, we will keep Prop 13 protections for residential properties, but for commercial and industrial properties, we will remove those protections, and they could be charged a higher rate of property tax. Now, if that were to pass, that means that large warehouses, you know, like in Inland Empire or here in City of Industry, City of Irwindale, but any type of commercial or, you know, industrial property would be charged at a significantly higher rate for them. And you know, if you're running a business and suddenly you have to pay 3 times the amount of tax that you're paying before on your property, that's a killer. The other problem that runs into that is it puts an onus on the tax assessors in each county, because they would have to go out, reassess the property, and then charge them at a much higher rate. Do you know how long it will take to go through every commercial and industrial property in LA County? I mean, years without end. It would be a very difficult task to reassess everybody according to their property values. So split roll is an absolute red line. That's something that should be defeated, and the voters, I hope, in the state will defeat it. It's a complicated issue, and so it may turn out to be a lot like Prop 8 last year, which was about the kidney dialysis measure. Does everybody remember the kidney dialysis measure? Does anybody know what that thing was about? I do, but I mean, it's a complicated thing, and you're asking your average voters to like deal with property tax. Most people are like, what? You know? So I think that thing will be on, it's going to be on the ballot. I hope it goes down to defeat. I have trust in the great people of the state of California, but maybe my hope is misplaced. All right, people, you've been wonderful. Oh, wait, one last question.
I'm sorry that I'm taking your time, but now, if you were in a food business, then obviously you were looking for a way to help hunger. Now, since we're in the real estate business, is there any way that you can get some help for homeless people?
That's a challenging one. Some cities, what I would really encourage you from the real estate standpoint is, look, homelessness is a huge issue, especially in LA County, especially here in the San Gabriel Valley, because we've seen our numbers of homelessness tick up very significantly. Now, one of the great success stories is the city of Alhambra. City of Alhambra, they had a count, I think in 2017, they went from 44 homeless people to 89. And they've gotten some money from the county, and they have a full-time staff person at the city who helps to coordinate this. And basically, they take that money and they put it in towards transitional housing, trying to get people off the streets. Because the way you deal with housing is, until you house them, you can't really deal with any other problem that they have. Many of these people have mental illness. Some of these people have very serious drug addictions. Some people, can be violent and so on. You have to get them in housing. You have to get them stable until you can deal with the other issues. So what I would really encourage you is just talk to your cities, especially your council people when you see them, and talk about two things. One, talk about accessory dwelling units. And say, look, we don't want to impact fees. Let the homeowners do these type of things, because it's a whole new way of improving and kind of selling properties. And it's a way to house more people very quickly. Two, talk to them about saying, get some funding, find a way to get someone to do kind of full-time homelessness in your city. I don't have a lot of faith in the county government. I have more faith in the local governments. If they're given the resources, they are very motivated to deal with homeless issues. And so if you have a full-time person at your cities doing homelessness, you can get a lot of people off the streets very quickly. And it helps to improve your community, safety is improved, people feel safer. So that's what I would work on. All right, it's been great.